Wrestling wildcards, what I'm about to walk you through, isn't just another WWE backstage brawl, and it certainly isn't your everyday confrontation between two superstars. No. What unfolded on that fateful night was something far more savage, far more unrestrained, and far more disturbing than the scripted chaos we've come to expect inside the squared circle. This was Brock Lesnar unleashed. What the cameras captured in those crowded backstage corridors wasn't simply a fight. It was a spectacle of vengeance, a symphony of destruction orchestrated by the most dangerous man to ever step foot in a WWE ring. The Beast Incarnate took all the fury, all the humiliation, and all the pent-up rage from weeks of provocation and poured it into Bronson Reed's battered body. The result was one of the most one-sided, devastating backstage massacres in WWE history, a confrontation so brutal that fans and insiders alike are still debating whether Reed's career, reputation, and even his confidence can survive the aftermath. But to truly appreciate what went down, to understand why Lesnar's assault felt different, felt real, we have to rewind. We need to revisit the moment that triggered this war, the ambush that lit a fire under the Beast and sealed Reed's fate long before a single punch was thrown. The spark. Reed's fatal miscalculation. 2 weeks before the chaos, Bronson Reed stood tall over a fallen Brock Lesnar, his chest heaving with pride, a steel pipe in hand, and a smirk plastered across his face. For the Australian powerhouse, this was the moment he believed he had arrived, the moment he declared himself a predator in a jungle dominated for years by Lesnar alone. Reed's ambush was meticulously planned. He used the element of surprise, he used weapons, he used numbers, briefly aligning with lesser-known enforcers backstage who softened the Beast just long enough for Reed to land the killing blows. In that moment, Reed looked like a man who had solved the unsolvable riddle. How do you bring down the most unstoppable force in WWE history? The sight of Lesnar sprawled on the concrete, struggling to rise while Reed stood above him, wasn't just shocking, it was blasphemy. For years, WWE fans had been conditioned to believe that Brock Lesnar was untouchable. He was the end boss, the alpha predator, the walking apocalypse who ended The Undertaker's streak, who manhandled John Cena like a rookie, who turned Kofi Kingston's fairy tale into a nightmare in 8 seconds flat. To see him reduced, even momentarily, to prey was something few thought possible. And Bronson Reed relished it. He strutted through the following weeks with swagger. He spoke in interviews about how even legends could fall if you were smart enough, vicious enough, and daring enough to seize the opportunity. He painted himself as the new monster of WWE, a modern-day juggernaut who had embarrassed the Beast Incarnate on the biggest stage. But here's what Reed didn't understand. Attacking Brock Lesnar doesn't end the fight. It begins the war, and wars with Lesnar don't conclude until he decides they're finished. The hunt begins. By the time Raw rolled around, Brock Lesnar wasn't coming to perform, to entertain, or even to compete. He was coming to hunt. Backstage sources revealed that Lesnar arrived at the arena hours earlier than usual, an ominous sign for those who know his typical habits. Unlike most wrestlers who linger in the locker room or mingle with peers, Brock is notoriously private. He arrives, does his business, and leaves. But that night, the Beast prowled the corridors like a predator, scanning, searching, biding his time. Word spread quickly among the locker room. Lesnar was looking for Reed. The tension was palpable. Wrestlers who had nothing to do with the feud kept their distance, understanding instinctively that to be caught in Lesnar's path was to risk collateral damage. WWE officials, meanwhile, scrambled behind the scenes, debating whether to intervene preemptively. But who in their right mind volunteers to approach Brock Lesnar when he's in that state? For over an hour, the Beast stalked the labyrinth of hallways, production areas, and catering sections, his every movement radiating intent. He wasn't wandering aimlessly. He wasn't pacing. He was hunting. And when he finally found Bronson Reed near the catering area, casually chatting with other wrestlers as if nothing could touch him, the air turned electric. The calm before the storm shattered in an instant. The first strike, violence without warning. Bronson Reed never saw it coming. There was no stare down, no dramatic pause for the cameras, no verbal jousting to signal what was about to unfold. In fact, there was barely even a second to process the danger. One moment, Reed was relaxed, exchanging casual words with fellow wrestlers near the catering area, the hum of backstage chatter filling the air. The next moment, the atmosphere shifted, the sudden silence of people realizing something catastrophic was about to happen. Brock Lesnar rounded the corner like a predator, finally spotting its prey. His eyes locked on Reed with a glare so sharp it froze the air itself. And then, without warning, he exploded forward. The tackle wasn't a wrestling move meant to entertain. It was pure collision, a violent burst of kinetic energy that looked more like a linebacker blindsiding a quarterback than anything you'd see in a scripted arena. Reed, for all his size and power, was caught completely off guard. His massive frame was lifted, twisted, and driven backward by Lesnar's raw momentum. Together, they crashed through a catering table with catastrophic force. The wooden frame splintered, plates shattered into shards that scattered across the floor. Drinks and food exploded into the air, splattering walls and floor alike in a chaotic spray. The thunderous sound of bodies colliding with furniture echoed through the corridor like a gunshot, drawing gasps and shouts from anyone within earshot. From that instant, the massacre began. Unlike Reed's ambush weeks earlier, carefully planned, calculated, executed with the benefit of surprise, Lesnar's assault was something else entirely. This wasn't theatrical rage or wild brawling. This was clinical destruction, born of instinct and experience. Every strike had purpose. Every slam, every blow, every movement was delivered with the precision of a man who knew exactly how to maximize damage while minimizing waste. The atmosphere backstage changed instantly. Other wrestlers, who seconds before had been laughing, chatting, and enjoying downtime, now scattered like prey, fleeing a predator. Some ran for safety, others stood frozen, wide-eyed, caught between fear and fascination. A handful, perhaps driven by morbid curiosity, raised their phones to capture what was unfolding. But the footage, according to insiders, was so disturbingly violent that WWE executives have yet to consider airing it in full. Systematic destruction. Turning the environment into weapons. Once Reed was down, Lesnar shifted gears from explosive fury to cold calculation. He grabbed equipment cases, ramming them into Reed's ribs with mechanical precision. He used steel barriers like battering rams, sandwiching Reed between unforgiving metal and concrete walls. Every surface became a weapon. Tables, crates, even the floor itself, as Lesnar repeatedly slammed Reed down with spine-crunching suplexes. This was not theatrical wrestling. This wasn't the rhythmic back and forth of a scripted match. This was one man methodically dismantling another, piece by piece. Witnesses described Reed's cries for mercy, his desperate attempts to crawl away, his futile efforts to shield himself. But the beast was relentless. Each time Reed tried to create distance, Lesnar closed the gap with terrifying speed. His background as an NCAA Division I wrestler and UFC heavyweight champion shining through. The most disturbing part wasn't the violence itself, it was Lesnar's composure. He didn't snarl, he didn't scream, he didn't appear out of control. He dismantled Bronson Reed the same way a mechanic might disassemble an engine, carefully, efficiently, without wasted motion. To Lesnar, this wasn't rage. This was business. Reed's desperation. A predator, reduced to prey. For a man who had built his reputation on power and intimidation, Reed's transformation in this encounter was heartbreaking. The same man who weeks earlier strutted with arrogance, proclaiming himself the new monster, was now reduced to begging. At one point, according to sources, he even tried to hide behind fellow wrestlers, using them as human shields. That image alone, a supposed powerhouse cowering behind others, spoke volumes about how thoroughly Lesnar had broken his spirit. His offense was non-existent. His size was irrelevant. His strength was meaningless. Every attempt to fight back was swatted aside like a child swinging at a storm. This wasn't just a beating, it was a stripping away of identity. Bronson Reed wasn't a threat anymore. He was a victim. Escalation. Weapons of precision. For those who were unlucky enough to witness the backstage carnage in real time, the most frightening part wasn't the opening tackle through the catering table, or even the barrage of suplexes that left Bronson Reed gasping for air. No. The true escalation came when Brock Lesnar decided fists and raw power weren't enough. He began to improvise, to weaponize his surroundings, and in doing so, he blurred the line between sports entertainment and genuine combat. The moment Reed tried to push himself up, bloodied, dazed, but still defiant, Lesnar snatched the nearest steel chair. But unlike a typical WWE chair shot, designed for spectacle and noise, this wasn't for show. Lesnar didn't swing wildly. He measured, he aimed, and when the chair connected with Reed's ribs, the sound wasn't the hollow clang fans are used to. It was a low, gut-wrenching thud, the unmistakable sound of flesh and bone absorbing punishment. Witnesses said you could feel the vibration echo through the concrete floor, and Lesnar didn't stop there. He shifted seamlessly from chair shots to heavier, less conventional tools. Massive production crates, meant to hold lighting rigs and camera cables, became instruments of entrapment. With frightening creativity, Lesnar shoved one against Reed's legs, pinning him down, then used another to crush his arm against the wall. Each movement was disturbingly efficient, as though the beast had rehearsed these tactics in his mind long before stepping into the hallway. What made the moment even more unsettling was Lesnar's composure. He wasn't gritting his teeth in rage or screaming with adrenaline. He was calm, methodical. His background in amateur wrestling, where leverage and positioning are everything, fused with his UFC experience, where precision dictates survival. This wasn't a bar fight. This was a man dissecting his opponent with surgical cruelty, making every strike count. The crowd of wrestlers and staff that had gathered at a safe distance could only watch in silence. They'd seen chair shots, they'd seen brawls spill backstage, but this was different. This wasn't entertainment. This was anatomy being weaponized. Lesnar knew exactly where to hit Reed to maximize pain without causing irreversible injury. He targeted the ribs to weaken Reed's breathing. He drove the chair into the shoulder to compromise power. He stomped on the leg to cripple mobility. Every strike was calculated to dismantle Reed's body like a machine being taken apart, piece by piece. Perhaps the most terrifying realization came as Lesnar paused, scanning the room for his next weapon. He wasn't improvising in panic, he was strategizing. That thin, chilling line between permanent destruction and long-term trauma. That's where Lesnar lived, and he was walking it with complete confidence. By this point, Reed wasn't fighting anymore. He was surviving. And those who saw it understood. This wasn't just Brock Lesnar punishing a rival. This was Brock Lesnar demonstrating to the entire WWE roster that when he decides to escalate, there's no script, no safety net, only violence, delivered with the precision of a predator who knows exactly how to cripple without killing. Security's futile intervention. As Bronson Reed lay broken amidst the wreckage of overturned tables, dented crates, and twisted steel, it became painfully clear to everyone watching that Brock Lesnar had no intention of stopping. His breathing was steady, his eyes focused, his every movement still carrying the terrifying intensity of a predator circling prey. And so, with Reed's well-being hanging in the balance, WWE security finally had no choice but to intervene. But calling it an intervention might be generous. From the very first attempt, it was obvious this was less about stopping Lesnar and more about damage control. Two guards rushed forward first, hoping to catch him off guard and wrestle him away from the downed Reed. It looked brave in the moment, until the beast turned, seized one man by the shirt, and flung him into a stack of equipment cases with the ease of tossing laundry. The second guard fared no better, absorbed by a thunderous clothesline that nearly flipped him inside out. The message was clear. 2 men weren't even enough to slow Lesnar down. Moments later, 4 more guards swarmed in, perhaps believing that numbers would succeed where courage had failed. But Lesnar, battle-tested from UFC octagons and pro wrestling wars alike, treated them as little more than distractions. One was suplexed onto the concrete floor, landing with a sickening thud that silenced even the rowdiest of onlookers. Another was shoved face first into the wall, leaving him clutching his jaw in agony. The other 2? They were bulldozed by Lesnar's sheer momentum as he powered through them like a juggernaut, never once breaking stride from his assault on Reed. By this point, chaos had fully consumed the backstage area. Staff members were shouting for order, referees tried pleading with Lesnar to stop, and wrestlers hovered at a safe distance, unwilling to risk becoming collateral damage. Yet Lesnar's dominance only grew more terrifying. Security wasn't containing him. They were feeding him. Each fresh body that entered the fray only gave the beast another excuse to showcase his frightening superiority. It took nearly 10 men before Lesnar finally paused, not because he was winded, not because he was struggling, but because even he seemed mildly irritated by the swarm buzzing around him. The sheer sight of a small army surrounding one man should have been reassuring. Instead, it became another image etched into the mythos of Brock Lesnar. One man so dangerous, so unrestrained, that it required an entire squad to even slow his momentum. And even then, restrained wasn't the right word. Lesnar wasn't trapped. He wasn't overpowered. He was simply delayed. He stood in the center of that human circle, chest heaving, face calm, but clearly annoyed, like a predator denied his kill. Everyone watching knew that if he decided to break free, nothing short of riot police could have stopped him. In that moment, the lesson was clear. Brock Lesnar doesn't get contained. He allows himself to be paused, and the terrifying reality for WWE was knowing that, when he's ready, he can unleash that fury again, no matter how many men are in his way. Psychological warfare, words that cut, deeper than blows. For all the brutality of Brock Lesnar's fists, suplexes, and chair shots, what made this assault unforgettable wasn't just the physical carnage, it was the venom in his words. Between each strike, Lesnar didn't simply attack Bronson Reed's body. He attacked his psyche. Every growl, every insult, every carefully chosen phrase served as a weapon just as devastating as the steel in his hands. "You thought you could embarrass me?" Lesnar spat after a brutal chair shot cracked across Reed's ribs. His voice wasn't theatrical. It wasn't shouted for the benefit of the cameras. It was low, guttural, and terrifyingly real. The kind of tone that cut through the chaos and silenced the room. To Reed, struggling for breath, it wasn't a taunt. It was a reminder that he had awoken something primal that could no longer be controlled. Moments later, after hurling Reed into the unforgiving edge of a production crate, Lesnar sneered again. "You thought attacking me from behind made you dangerous?" The disdain in his tone was almost more punishing than the blow itself. In wrestling, perception is everything. Momentum, credibility, reputation, those intangibles are as vital as physical ability. By ridiculing Reed's sneak attack strategy, Lesnar wasn't just dismissing his tactics. He was publicly dismantling Reed's identity as a threat. Then came the most chilling line of the night. Standing over Reed's battered body, Lesnar leaned down, his voice carrying the calmness of a man who knew he was in total control. "Let me show you what real violence looks like." The words lingered in the air, resonating with everyone watching, fans in the arena, wrestlers backstage, and millions at home. It was more than a statement. It was a declaration of dominance, a mission statement for the chaos Lesnar was unleashing. These weren't random bursts of trash talk. They were deliberate, almost surgical verbal strikes. Lesnar knew exactly what he was doing. A seasoned fighter with a background in both professional wrestling and mixed martial arts, he understood that combat is as much psychological as it is physical. He wasn't just making Reed feel pain. He was making him doubt himself, stripping away the confidence and bravado that had fueled Reed's challenge in the first place. In the hyper-competitive world of WWE, where reputation is currency, Lesnar's verbal assault was catastrophic. Reed wasn't only being demolished physically, his credibility was being annihilated in real time. Every mocking phrase sent a ripple through the locker room, reminding the roster that Brock Lesnar was more than just an opponent. He was a force of nature who could shatter careers with words as easily as with fists. And that was the real genius of Lesnar's attack. Anyone can throw a punch, anyone can swing a chair. But to make a man question his worth, to erode his confidence in front of the world, to turn his bravado into ashes, that is psychological warfare. Lesnar proved that night that he doesn't just break bodies, he breaks spirits. For Reed, the physical wounds would heal, the bruises would fade, but the echo of Lesnar's words, the humiliation, the exposure, the reminder that he had dared challenge a beast far beyond his reach, would haunt him long after the pain subsided. Because in WWE, your body may recover. Your reputation? That's another story.